And with that, I would like to turn over to Wayne Talcott this morning as he brings us our morning message.
Thank you, Richard. Hey, you look great. At our church here, people are very casual, and so I have not worn a tie since I moved to Florida, but I do miss it for church and miss it for speaking. I didn't wear one today, as you can see. This is a dressy Florida shirt, though. It's a very dressy Florida shirt, but I do love seeing it. And when I speak at church there, I have to wear a jacket. I feel like important things you need to be dressed, but it's hard to do that by Zoom. Let me get my service here. It's nice. It's always nice to be invited here. Thank you. I hope you'll keep inviting me. I miss you all. I will have to admit, I do enjoy the Bible study that we do, the spiritual work we do on Tuesday nights, but I mostly enjoy seeing familiar faces and connecting with those of you who I used to see on a regular basis. So I really appreciate the Sunday school class feeds me. I hope I'm helping the rest of you. Well, Easter people. So my reaction to that, I'll be honest with you, it sounds like, when I first saw that, I thought that's kind of a funny title, Easter People Act. It sounds a little like a zombie movie. I don't think it meant that way. The Easter people are coming, but the idea that those who believe in Jesus and who are Christians are really called to act, which is what Richard was talking about. And I agree, Richard, that those verses in John, it's like you read it, it's like reading it for the first time. I know I've read that before, but it has so much more meaning to me now. Well, let me get started. I want to talk just about that. So what exactly, so if I were supposed to act as an Easter person, what does that mean? And how should I go about acting? Do I just pick something? I do think your behavioral bingo is kind of one piece to kind of raise awareness for some of the actions that might be supported. In fact, I'm pretty intrigued by that. I think that was a great idea. I hope you all are doing it. And if you are, I may try to introduce that in this congregation here. So Richard Rohr, in his book, Falling Upward, says that he finds that much of the spiritual and pastoral work of churches is often ineffective at the levels of real transformation. And it calls forth immense passivity among the members of the church, and even many passive-aggressive responses. So Rohr says, I find that I remember Richard Rohr is a Franciscan monk. So he's a Catholic who writes widely. Most of you probably know about him. Anyway, he says, I find that I'm forced to dumb down the material in order to interest a Sunday crowd that doesn't expect or even really want any real challenge, nor does it exhibit much spiritual or intellectual curiosity. What people want, he says, is to have repeated what they expect to hear, and maybe a joke or two. It seems that church often falls short of facing the important issues of our day, like divorce and failure, an inner life of prayer, or any radical reading of the gospel. And they tend to be bored by the typical Sunday church agenda. And they're all good people, he says, but they want to do their own survival dance. They want to come up with their own Christianity. I'll do this, but I won't do that. And isn't that at least partially true for us? Aren't we at least somewhat wanting to hear familiar stories from the Bible? And biblical stories that don't fit our personal narrative are avoided, or we treat them with great suspicion. Thomas Merton, another theologian, points out that many of us develop our own personal salvation project. We've successfully constructed our own superior ethnic group and religion. It's my religion, about me, and have a hard time leaving those. Once you can get out of your comfort zone, he says, to leave your castle, then much of the Christian journey has a life and death of its own. And that's what I'm mostly excited about and want to talk to you about today, is what exactly does that mean? You know, we often miss a central Christian message and an ancient message for how to find the narrow path. So what is it that this Easter people act really referring to exactly? Even as certain as Paul was about the lessons of Christ, and Paul was pretty certain, right? He wrote most of the New Testament, we think. Even Paul said, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." So Paul is saying here, I kind of have an idea of what's expected to live the way, but it's another version of that Bible would be see through a glass darkly. I kind of have an image of it, but I don't know exactly. One day we'll know more. Paul felt that he had a general idea of what was expected of us to live the way, laid out by Christ before his death. But he admits that even he doesn't see it all that clearly. Well, I'm not Paul. I'll tell you, far from it. But I'd like to attempt to explain what I think the scripture and other great works are pointing to, using many other people aside from just me for action in order to live a meaningful life. It seems that much of our time is spent being thankful for Jesus and God's grace. And that's not a bad thing. But what's the other side of that coin? What are we called to do as a result? So, Paul says you are saved by grace, but because of that, there's got to be some payback. The fact that you're saved by grace is a wonderful thing. We really believe that. But then if you really believe that, then you will want to do the things to pay back. Not that you're being held to it, but just to pay back because it's the right thing. Well, I'd like to discuss just that and also discuss the benefits for striving to live the way and living with the Spirit of God. I have to keep reminding myself, and I do this, it's a journey, stupid, not a state. So I don't think I'll ever arrive at a place where I come to this service and say, I just want you all to know I've arrived. I am as good as Jesus was. And so you can just treat me like that. It's never going to happen. I'm not even going to get close. But it is a journey, and it was never expected to be anything other than that. The way is a journey. So we're always going to fall short, and that's not a problem. The problem is if we don't aspire to be better. So let's start at the beginning. What were God's words to Abraham and Sarah? When we go back, what was the nudge? Well, it wasn't a small nudge. It was, God said, leave your country, your family, and your father's house for the new land that I will show you. That's Genesis 12. Oh, but wait a minute, you might say, that's some Old Testament stuff. Doesn't Jesus want us to be safe and comfortable? Can't we get to pick and choose what parts of the Bible that we're going to pay attention to? This journey of leaving home and discovering a better country is repeated in the Bible over and over again. It's also repeated in our great literary works across time. This isn't just about Abraham and Sarah. For instance, in the New Testament, there are clear invitations to leave your father and your nets, Matthew chapter 4. Wait a minute. Jesus is talking to his disciples about further journeys, and yet these are people who are already happily settled in their lives, and they're religiously settled. Well, Jesus says to that, for whoever wants to save their life, they will lose it. And whoever loses their life for me will find it. What he's saying here is you've got to give that up. You got to give the comfort up. It isn't about being comfortable. It's about living the way and finding your real self. That's what Jesus is asking. We are clearly called to discover a new life. Some would say this new life is the real life instead of the life our society dictates. As Christians, I think most of us would say that we aspire to be Christ-like. Christ and his teachings are seen by most Christians as the iconic symbol of perfection in how to live a life. So here comes the tough question for you all. What would that look like for you if you truly set out to do that? What practices would you do? What would you do different? Again, Richard Rohr, a Franciscan monk, says that most people confuse their life situation, the way I do things from day to day, with your real life, which is an underlying flow beneath the everyday events. The real life is a much deeper river, hidden beneath the appearances. It's the theme under all the happenings that are going on. So I see your behavior, but I really don't know what's deep in you. The call is to discover your authentic life energy and to live a hero's life like Jesus. It's ironic that once you built your house so that life is more predictable and comfortable, you feel the Spirit nudge you to move on. If you want to truly find your soul, you are called to embark on a hero's journey. Just a brief story. One of the things I'm doing is the hero's journey is a journey to help you see things in a new way. And I had a really good example of that. It's not, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but a realization. I'm taking a Florida Master Gardener's course, and I'm well into the course. And I really became much more aware. So these people who are teaching in the Master Gardener's course, if you take a weed and show it to them, they treat that weed like they would a rose. I mean, they look at it and they talk about its petioles, they talk about its fluorescence, they talk about the cockleburs if they're on it, they talk about where it grows and how, with almost a smile. And you give them a rose, they'll talk about it exactly the same way. And one of the things I've learned, I've only been in this course now for 3 months, so I have much more to learn, but you learn to be aware of what's been around you all the time in a very different way. I can now look, I go out on walks with Lisa and I look for a particular weed that's growing and the sections of it and the flower that it has and where it's growing, and appreciate it. And I've walked by those many, many, many times over the past couple of years that we've been here. And yet I never saw it, but it's always been there. And I thought that's so interesting that here, all these things in life are around us. And yes, we know they're there, but we don't really see them. We fail to see the world as it really is when it comes to plants, when it comes to people, and I think sometimes when it comes to God. By finding your soul, I mean developing a growing awareness that part of your experience that senses the presence of God and sees and experiences the world as it is, rather than how we are told it is. That's not, when I would be in this gardener course, I'm embarrassed now. I wasn't embarrassed then, I was just ignorant, but I'd say, yeah, weeds, why do I need to memorize weeds? I kill weeds. I'm a weed killer. And I said, unfortunately, that didn't go over very well, but because they greatly appreciate weeds. And I do too now. But I was the same way with bugs. It's like, well, what I do, if I see a bug on one of my plants, I quickly kill it, or I spray some kind of a horrible poison on it. Well, it turns out about 90% of bugs actually are good for your plants. Only 10% are bad guys, and some of the good bugs kill the bad bugs. I didn't know that. And so now when I see a giant-eyed beetle on one of my plants, I realize that beetle is going to kill a bunch of the bugs that are going to kill that plant, and leave it alone and encourage it. It's just seeing differently. That's what we're called to do. So Rohr says, by definition, authentic God experience is always too much when exposed to God directly. It consoles our true self only after it has devastated our false self, which is the too much part. In order to truly experience God, you have to give up your ego. And I mean, literally give up your ego, which none of us are going to completely do, but that's the work ahead. That's the hard part. Being willing to give up some of those selfish comforts for a new and exciting future, although maybe just a bit scary. I don't think Jesus wants us to be comfortable and safe. I don't think that's the message of the. I don't think Jesus wants bad things to happen to us. I don't think at all that's the case. But that's not the end state of Christianity. We must begin to be honest about this instead of dishing out fast food religion. There's a cost for finding your soul. And by soul, I mean that place in you that has the divine spark. The hero's journey is one that's been with mankind since we could write. Homer's Iliad is a perfect example of a story for a hero's journey. As you look across history, you see that this journey is depicted in many ways, but it's over and over and over again, not just in Christianity, but in other religions, other cultures. So there are several things that happen to have a hero's journey. The first is, and think about stories you know, the person starts by living in a world that they take as sufficient. There are often stories of a prince or princess, and sometimes of divine origin, which they know nothing about. This amnesia is a key to the core religious problem. It isn't that God isn't with us. It's that we don't remember that God is with us. And I'm going to use the word other periodically because I get frustrated because when I say God, I've at least for me, I think of this old man, this old white guy, in the sky, and that's not God. I mean, there's nothing like that. That's God. So I use the word other because I can't begin to explain God. And certainly I'm not going to gender God. So I'm going to go back and forth. So I apologize if I irritate you by not using God every time, but it's because I want to get the idea that there is an other presence in the universe, and it isn't an old white man. So we set out to discover our divine DNA, our soul. So that's the first thing. It's a journey. The second thing is the person feels they have a call to leave home for an adventure, not really to solve a problem, but just to go outside their comfort zone. We feel nudged once we're secure where we are. We feel nudged to move on. For example, Siddhartha, or the Buddha, left the walls of his palace. St. Francis goes on pilgrimage to the Muslim world. Queen Esther and Joan of Arc battle to protect their peoples. Odysseus sets out for the Trojan War. These stories go on and on. It's the hero's journey. So they have a call. That's the second thing. The third is on the journey, they find their real problem. They're almost always wounded in some way. The whole story revolves around solving the wound. They then have an epiphany that the wound actually becomes the secret key to the sacred. The wound changes them dramatically. And according to Rohr, this is the precise meaning of the wounds of Jesus. Think of the story of Odysseus from Homer's Iliad, written 700 BC. Odysseus enters the story as a man alone, weeping on a beach, defeated, with no hope of ever returning home, for he would one day be a hero. That is the gnawing, unending wound for Odysseus, to find home, back to Ithaca. Fourth, the hero falls through their life situation to discover their real life, who they really are. That's by solving the wound. And this is basically a journey to find your soul, which the wound, solving the wound, helps you reveal. And finally, the hero returns home, but knows the place for the first time. It's as if they've never been there. It looks completely different. Think of the story of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, another hero journey. Our literature is filled with this same story. And I believe that it is because we are ever so gently pulled to find our soul, our real self. I think this is in our DNA. We so want to return to Eden. to be with the other. And as a result of resolving the wound, their world is opened up and the screen becomes much larger. They see the world with new eyes and in a different way. If we go to the depths of anything, we begin to knock on something real with a timeless quality to it. I think about these silly plants, and I appreciate a weed like I have never appreciated a weed. Why did I ever hate weeds? I don't want them in my St. Augustine, but I do appreciate them in a very different way. It's then that we leave the starter kit of belief that Richard talked about a little bit earlier to an actual inner knowing. That's kind of where we're heading. You don't want to get into arguments about whether there is or isn't a God or what God is or what God's like. You need to just know. I wonder whether we no longer have that real obedience to the gods or sense of destiny, call, and fate that led Odysseus to leave father, wife, and son. Like the call to Abraham, Buddha, and Moses, and many, many more, even Joseph Smith. We are called to take the hero's journey. Some of you are well into it. Others have not yet started. I met a number of people in the course of my life whose wounds, divorce, cancer, depression, loss of loved ones, handicaps, injuries from accidents, where they tell their story, they explain that the act of recovering from their wounds, through that, they have become stronger and with a new perspective on life. They see it with new eyes. It's always been there, but now they're seeing it as it is, not how they were told to view it. Kill all weeds and all bugs. It's almost like pulling the curtain back so you can see clearly. The image in Dorothy is she goes to see the wizard, and what happens? The curtain gets pulled back. We were meant to thrive, not merely survive. We are meant to be generative, meaning striving to somehow make things better for others. We're meant to find our soul by taking the hero's journey. And when you do discover your soul, maybe only for a moment, you find a new perspective on reality, a larger view of the world and God. It is here where you find your meaning in this life and your soul. What would a taste of that real life be like? What's behind the curtain? We all know something's there. Having only had a glimpse of that in my life, I can only describe what I felt when I felt the other was awe. Indescribable. What do we know about the other? Well, we do some research. We can't know much, but Dr. Bill Miller, a psychologist at the University of New Mexico, has studied people who've had these mystical experiences, who've come close to experience, or actually have experienced the other that's always present. And he identified numerous people in his research, Buddhists, Muslims, Catholics, Protestants, who've all had spiritual experiences that have changed their lives. Was there a common theme? Miller says yes. All of the people who describe the mystical type of experience describe the other. Never mind their religious upbringing, they were in the presence of the same thing. What was experiencing the other like? Well, he says, it's profoundly loving and accepting beyond words. It doesn't demand anything of you at the moment. You simply feel accepted as you are and loved as you are to the very depth of your being. Love so intense that we don't have words for it. We call it ineffable. Sophie Burnham, a mystic, spent years after an experience with God that led her to study Asian religions for years and years in Asia. And at the end of it, she ended her journey where she started in the Episcopal Church. She had a hero's journey. She returned home, but noticed that it seems as if she was seeing her church for the first time. Why can't we get a substantial scientific effort to address the existence or proof of the other? We really can't directly do that because we really don't even know what God is. I use words like the other because when I say God, I think of this old wise man, which is not God. Even if we can't directly study the other, we can look for fingerprints. These hints of order, there are hints of order to our universe. Dr. Collins headed the federal government's Human Genome Project and wrote a book called The Language of God. Collins is an evangelical Christian, a statistical fluke in a rarefied scientific community. He states, I have been a blatant materialist during a significant part of my life, an atheist with no use for God. I'm now a very serious believer. He says, my DNA did not change during that time interval. He became a Christian when he was a 27-year-old medical student at University of North Carolina. A woman with terminal cancer asked him whether he believed in God and eternity. He evaded the answer, but the question haunted him. He said, I came to the realization that my atheism had been chosen without considering the evidence for or against faith. As a scientist, you're not supposed to make decisions without looking at the data. So I decided I would learn more about God so I could defend my position. Collins said the central element that makes humans different from animals is the sense of right and wrong, which often prompts people to sacrifice themselves, not just for friends and family, but also for enemies. It is a drive that, according to Darwin's theory, would make one's selfish gene very unhappy. The selfish gene is where you say, I'm going to get mine so I can pass all my genes to somebody else. Transcendence is like music, he suggested, where you're transported briefly into this experience that you can't quite put into words, which leaves you with this longing to be part of something, but you don't know what it is exactly. The atheist will say, well, that's just your amygdala going off. But for the believer, it's a signpost. It's calling you to examine yourself and ask, what's here more than just molecules? John Barrow, a brilliant Cambridge mathematician, was speed walking his students through a hypothesis of a finely tuned universe that is exquisitely and astonishingly calibrated to allow for life. He explained the concept of multiverses, which suggests that we live in one of 10,500 universes. Think about that. Then he said, almost as an aside, I'm quite happy with the traditional theistic view of the universe. Well, Richard Dawkins was in the room, and if you know Richard Dawkins, he's an astrophysicist and an adamant atheist. He was furious by Barrow's comment about theism, and he said, why on earth do you believe in God? At that moment, all heads turned to Barrow. If you want to look for divine action, he said, physicists look at the rationality of the universe and the mathematical structure of the world. Yes, but why do you want to look for divine action? Dawkins demanded. And Barrow said, well, for the same reason that someone might not want to. Science is a new enterprise. In the span of time we've been on this earth, we are basically monkeys who just fell out of a tree. To be so arrogant to assume that we're close to understanding the universe is insane. How much more insane is it to think you understand God, or that God does or doesn't exist? Paul said, now we see through a glass darkly. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. The different version of what I read earlier. He doesn't even begin to think he could understand the other. Marcus Borg, in his book, Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, says, I sometimes joke that if I ever were to write my spiritual autobiography, I would call it Beyond Belief. The full title would be Beyond Belief to Relationship. Moore continues, this has been my experience. My own journey has led beyond belief and beyond doubt and disbelief to an understanding of the Christian life as a relationship to the Spirit of God, a relationship that involves one in a journey of transformation. Alan Jackson is a country singer. I like country music because my wife made me. He's 65. He has a new song out, and I think the words are so appropriate here, at least mostly appropriate. He says, the older I get, it's the people you love, not the money and stuff, that makes you rich. And if they found a fountain of youth, I wouldn't drink a drop. And that's the truth. Funny how it feels. I'm just getting to my best years yet. The older I get, the longer I pray. I don't know why. I guess that I've got more to say. And the older I get, the more thankful I feel for the life I've had and all the life I'm living still. As for me, I remember a conversation with Richard, your Richard, when he asked why I wouldn't be a pastor at the church, at that congregation there. And I told him, honestly, I don't have enough compassion for my fellow church members. Not that I didn't like them, but I just didn't feel compassion like I thought a pastor should. That was a long time ago, and I can say that my life journey has helped me appreciate the suffering of others in a way that I feel has brought me to a more compassionate life. I'm one of those people who will say that my wounds, the early death of my dad, a handicapped mother who struggled every day, limited financial means, caring for the many young people who were injured serving their country in Iraq, even my recent battle with necrotizing fasciitis, these occurrences have all made me who I am today. I am so thankful for this life. And in a weird way, my wounds, and wouldn't change a thing. I also don't want to be any younger. I'm happy with where I am and looking forward to what's next. It's so interesting. You know, I no longer question the presence of a divine force in this universe, and that force is loving beyond words. I've been fortunate to have some glimpses of the other, but my journey is far from over. God is no longer beliefs in my head, though, but rather he's moved to a loving kindness in my heart. I don't question it anymore. We're called to act and to step out, to listen to that still small voice that beckons us forward toward a better country. How to act? Actions that help you find your soul might include meditation, certainly helping those in need, a healthy dose of forgiveness, stop judging others, and most of all, find a place in your heart to find compassion for others. We could all use a bit more grace in this life. Thank you.